Let's do it. Let's
We're
do
going
it.
to head on down into our feature match area here. Looks like we've got a Mardu Knights versus Blue-Black Rogues, not a breeding pool in
Okay.
sight.
You have a huge disdain for breeding pools and Uros, huh? Jeff, come to the dark side. It's nice over here.
Right, we see our players taking their mulligans here, trying to figure out on the night side whether or not they want to keep 2 1-drops, be greedy and bottom a land, bottom their second 3.
All right.
This is, gosh, I guess it's going to be tough on coverage too, a little bit, learning to parse what people's hands actually are, like how many landers people are keeping. Because, so on top, they've got now another land spell drawn in Glasspool Mimic.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, the one thing that does help is that little check mark or that little arrow in the top left. That's kind of my little signal
That's
for
a
that
good
being
catch.
a land. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean these Mardu style decks historically just haven't had enough. But I mean, I'm guessing they're playing Maul of the. I'm gonna pull up their list now, but that new equipment I think seems great for this style of deck.
Yeah, I agree. I had played a red-white aggro deck, and Maul of the Skyclaves here actually ended up being better than Embercleave did in a lot of situations that we had.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And the Season Hollowblade into that just seems like one of the toughest things to deal with here. Just, take 5.
Yep. And we see here our Knights player on the bottom, True Steel, getting really paid off for keeping that double 1-drop with the second 1-drop draw here on turn 2. And their curve is just stellar, getting to curve 1-drop into 1-drop, 1-drop into 3-drop.
Agreed. And then Contender here to be able to restock again. Definitely wish you had the 3-drop Lord that they put to the bottom now, but still a very good draw. And tough for Dimir to answer these style of cards that get another Knight when they come into play with just spot removal. You know, that's always been pretty tricky against these style of decks, but that's going to be an excellent one.
Yep. So we've seen I've seen a lot of people compare the Blue-Black Rogues deck to the Mono Blue Tempo deck that was popular a season or 2 ago. And the big difference between the Rogues deck and that old Mono Blue deck is the Rogues deck isn't just dead when its opponent gets on board. So you have things like these Nighthawk Scavengers and removal like Drown in the Lock frequently, where you can actually interact with what's going on past the stack.
Yeah, 100%. And Drown in the Lock, usually a pretty medium card because you have to wait so long to get use out of it. But Drown in the Lock in this deck is just excellent. So easy to get cards flipped over, and then it's just a 2-mana destroy anything or counter anything. It's super good in the experience I've played so far.
Yeah, the mill has long been like kind of a casual favorite mechanic, and I really love the design direction they've taken with it, with this rogue sub theme, where it's now it's a payoff instead of the end game, right? Like your goal isn't to deck them, it's just to make your other cards better.
Yep, agreed.
Be interested to see here. So we've got both Brazen Borrower and Drown in the Lock on our rogue side of the table here. The bounce on the Inspiring Veteran lets the Wind Waker trade with the 2-1. And then probably going to see Drown in the Lock take care of this 3/3 first strike, I imagine.
Yeah, or the Inspiring Veteran here, but yeah, just out of gas here. That's why I almost would have liked True Steel to bottom land number 3 at the start, just because this deck does not handle flood very well. You know, these types of aggro decks, once you flood out, you're just flood out. You know, nothing extra to do with them. When your whole deck doesn't draw another card like Uro, Omnath, everything like that.
Speaking of flood and screw, how many spell land split cards is True Steel playing? Are they leveraging that aspect of Zendikar at all?
I'm still looking for the list here.
Let's take a peekaboo here. So it looks like they're on a couple of Shatter Skull Smashings and some Amaria's Call. They've got 18 actual lands in their deck, which is really, like, I feel like that, like, 16 to 20 mark is probably where we're going to see a lot of decks end up at this season.
Yep.
So, like, for comparison, the Dimir Tempo Rogue deck here is playing 16 actual lands, but then has, looks like 6, 12 has 12 spell land split cards. So like you're a 16 land deck that gets to play 28 lands.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how people approach the land count as well, because it's so tough for me to think if you want to count these as spells that sometimes can be lands or just rely on them as lands, and their spells sometimes. You know, it's kind of two ways to look at it here, and I'm not sure what's correct. And then you have to look at aggro versus control, two different puzzles as well. So
yeah, and the thing that makes it such an interesting deck building decision is it's not just linear yes no type thing. Like the bolt lands, for example, in an aggro deck, you're like, okay, this is probably just counted as an untapped land. But in a control deck, that's less likely to be true, because in a control deck, you're less likely to be able to afford to take those hits for 3.
Exactly. Yep. And they are in a control deck. Most of these control decks are 3 or 4 colors, because let's get real, Omnath is kind of the new control deck here.
Yep.
And then you're just playing a basic land. And when you have all these Fabled Passages and stuff in your deck, then you can't be just loading up on Amiria's Calls and Shatter Skull smashing and stuff like that. That's just more basics in a deck where you're already pretty intense on the mana.
And we see Embercleave here as a face-up combat trick because of the Acclaimed Contender. It's interesting to see where the Brazen Borrower goes. We could see it send the Cleave back to hand. We could see it bounce the actual threat.
Yeah, I think I like the threat here. Yeah, okay. All right. Cleave seems fine.
We see our...
Yeah, that Embercleave is going to be a problem here in this match.
Yeah, I feel like, so if you're the Rogues player, you're looking to peel another Drown in the Lock here, perhaps, to answer that Cleave.
Or, oh yeah, just counter it when you come back. That's for sure. Yeah, I don't think Scavenger's going to do it here. The one thing that Rogues don't do particularly well is block. You know, once you are behind, your creatures aren't going to help you specifically get back. You have a lot of removal to help you get back, but they do not block well.
Yep. Yeah, in my experience playing the Rogue deck the last couple of days, you're looking to use your life total as a resource when you're racing, but okay, there's Drown in the Lock. We're 1 land short of being able to drown and 3-drop, unfortunately, on Tom's side, but we'll see if being able to just stop that Embercleave is going to be enough to get through here.
Yeah, that's still great. But the problem is you do have to just block both these creatures, so you don't have any, possible double block scenarios here. So yeah, I think there's one block here, one thing to do, and just hope it's going to be enough. And I was even going to say at the beginning of the match that Amiria's Call in these type of really aggressive decks doesn't seem great to me. Just because it seems really hard to get up to 7. But I mean, here we are. We're 1 turn away from putting 2 4/4 Angels into play. And I mean, that's super powerful.
Oh, a little bit of a misclick there. You were talking about misclicks on the double-sided cards. We accidentally had an Adventure get cast there instead of casting a 3/1, and that could make or break the game, honestly, here.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I mean, these Adventure cards are new, so misclicks are going to happen with them.
Okay, and this is what, you talked about these calls, and this is where, in a control deck versus an aggro deck, they're different, right? So, like, in a control deck, you can't afford to be bolting, but here we see this not only making 2 4/4s, but making that 3/1 indestructible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the added clause there of indestructibility there was huge. That was absolutely huge on this board, forcing the block, but not trading there. That Amiria's Call looked excellent there.
Yeah, really getting rid of that big upside of the Scavenger, right? Like, it's supposed to be death touch and trade with anything that's going on.
Yep. Yeah.
All right.
Go ahead.
I have an important question that I always have to ask my fellow commentator when we get to the sideboarding screen for the first time. Do you trust people that don't sideboard using the pile view?
You mean that sideboard like this?
Yeah, I can't do it. How are you supposed to know what your curve looks like?
Exactly. Yeah, you don't know what your curve looks like. Everything about this is what I do not like to do in sideboarding. But Brad even sideboards like this. I was like, what are you doing, bro?
Oh, I didn't know that about Brad. Now I don't know how I feel about him anymore.
Yeah, yep. We're gonna have to not have him on in the booth anytime because of that. Yep.
So one of the things that's kind of interesting here we saw on our Mardu Knight side before they clicked off there is that we saw them trim one of their Shatter Skull, which is interesting because you're kind of boarding out lands when you're cutting these land spell split cards, right? So
Yeah.
they add tension during sideboarding too, where you're like, well, this spell's not really stellar in this matchup, but I really can't cut too many lands or I'm not going to get to play the game.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it comes down to even like the recovery card, Bala's recovery, the green one. That card was not very good for me against aggressive decks because the games don't go that long. And then you're leaving in just a tapped forest 99% of the time. So yeah, it is a struggle. You have to be considering in deck building which of these lands sometimes you would like to take out. And that is an extra challenge. So
We have a keep here on both sides. That spell land in the Spike Field Hazard there being the key second land for our Knights player.
Oh, nice top deck there.
Yep.
Yeah, these pathways for the Mardu colors are excellent.
Yep. And again, like this is something that we've kind of struggled with in terms of aggressive decks for a little bit, is having good untapped early mana is really key to making aggressive decks strong. And these pathways are always untapped, which is stellar.
Agreed. Yep. I mean, we lost our shocklands and stuff like that, but depending on the color combinations, you get more fixing. The aggressive color combinations, I believe Naya and Mardu have 3 pathways each, and that's stellar. That's much better than the 2 duels that you had before this rotation.
So you see that Soaring Thought Thief flashing in there. And remember, this is an open deck list tournament. So if you're on True Steel side, you knew that was a possibility when you attacked in. And we see that Rimrock Knight let them punch through nicely.
Yeah, I think I would have liked to keep that home with all these contenders in place, but reasonable.
See second Soaring Thought Thief coming down here. We'll probably see this Fabled Passage fetch our second blue source here to have all of our colors on the rogue side, I imagine. And this really feels like the type of game that the Rogues deck is interested in playing, right? Like they were on the play this game. They're keeping parity on board. They're getting to start applying pressure themselves before they get behind.
Yep. Yeah, now if you can get some of these scavengers down and not be in a position where you have to start blocking with them. These cards, we saw just Vampire Nighthawk even back in the day taking over games, and this is just a supercharged Nighthawk. So being able to attack with them is much better than having to block.
Yep, and Nighthawk Scavenger is another one of those cards that just like incidentally in the rogue theme plays well with milling your opponent a little bit, where again, the goal isn't to deck your opponent by milling, but the goal is to enable your other powerful cards, and Scavenger is a really powerful card to be enabling.
Agreed. If you ever get that thing to like 4 power or anything more than that, it is just such a huge threat.
So we see, I think there's 3 cards in True Steel's graveyard right now. So this Thought Thief will put them up to 5, I believe. So I believe we're still 1 short of Thieves Guild Enforcer being able to enable that key 8.
Wow, but those 2 mills just boosted the Nighthawk 2 more points there. You gotta love that. When you hit 2 mills, you hit 2 types that were not in the yard. That feels good. Smitten Swordmaster, huh? That's an interesting one.
Oh, is that what they're part of their black splash is for?
Yeah, that's the drain. That's the drain one, right?
Yep, the old drainin game there. And we see already there's, 3 knights in play for our Mardu player.
Yeah, and I mean, right here, we got a quite battlefield here. The life gain is definitely being helpful, but there's a lot of attackers coming through.
This is a key exchange. So we see that Enforcer being a mill enabler to help with the whole sub-theme as well, but also gaining Death Touch and acting as a piece of removal here, basically.
Yeah, just getting to eat a free token as well and then be able to swing back. And just a 7/3 Nighthawk Scavenger. No big deal here.
Yeah, and again, this is exactly that type of game that the Rogues deck is looking to play, where like you have your evasive threats in the air, you basically are getting attacked on the ground a bunch, but you don't care because you have enough power in the air to win the race, and Scavenger's keeping your life total. Even Cleave doesn't win this race.
Yeah, not even close. Like Cleave is not really doing too much here. This is Looking like a runaway.
Yep.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, looking at the rogue deck without Zerasan, and that is what Tom Tracy is playing here. Interesting. That card just seems like it has to be like an evergreen theme for these rogues, but this list does look nice. It's a lot more aggressive. Basically plays Rankle at that 4-drop instead, and hard to argue with that card. That card is one of the best black cards printed in the last year or so.
I often call Rankle the fairy dragon because it's that flying haste type effect, and with each player loses a life and draws a card, it basically hits for 4, right?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, just so many things to do with that card, too. You feel like you're in control of the match a lot more. So then when you lose, you're like, well, I probably just should have been more aggressive with Rankle. Maybe I shouldn't gave him cards, just stripped resources. It's a really cool design card.
Yeah, a lot of choices. Big agree that from a design perspective, it's one of my favorite cards printed.
Agreed. All right, game 3.
And we have a 4-land 5-spell hand here on our Mardu side. And what do we got going on over here? So we've got a 3-lander for our Rogues player, it looks like.
Yeah, looks decent. Definitely, so far from watching this match, it seems like the play has mattered a ton. Because they both have a little bit of interaction, but definitely want to be interacting as in moving blockers out of the way on key turns and stuff like that. Not really either of them transitioning into a control deck. They're both still trying to be proactive, and they're both just trying to use these key removals in key spots.
Something that's really interesting for me on Tracy's side of the board here is we see Agonizing Remorse in Tracy's deck post board, and especially on the draw, I don't know if I'm a fan of that decision. Like, I think on the play, I could maybe see the justification, but I really feel like you can't afford, like, this board's a good example, right? Like, Tracy can't afford to spend 2 mana not impacting the board this turn.
Yeah, the only thing that I kind of see why it's in there is Tom has a lot of bounce and stuff to like bounce Embercleave, but that card eventually takes over unless Tom is really getting to the battlefield with these scavengers like last game. So I feel like you just have to have something like that just to answer Cleave at some point because it just is so hard hitting against these decks.
That's a good thought. So we're leaving we're having Remorse in not as a turn 2 play because that is bad, but we're leaving it as a late game. This tags Cleave so I don't die to it.
Yeah, like right before, it would be a good Cleave turn. Or, of course, if the battlefield wasn't too threatening, cast it on turn 2. But it doesn't seem like how I would want to approach this matchup. But it just seems like that's maybe the only tools that are available here in this list.
And we see the Awakening there, the Black Bolt land, really showing that these effects are not free in these aggressive matchups, right? Like, Tom has to decide here, are we playing Scavenger or are we taking 3? And it looks like Tom's choosing to not take 3.
Yeah, and there, I think that feels like a moment where you're just like, all right, Scavenger and Prey, but when you got to take 3 as well, you're just dead if it dies. So.
Yep. Also worth noting too that like even if Tom deployed the Scavenger this turn, if there was a Maul or an Embercleave on the other side of the board, it's not even necessarily a great blocker.
Yep. And a little bit of a minor misstep there. If Embercleave was there, you would want to bounce that at the beginning of combat.
I think Tom was playing to the out there of hoping that his opponent would target the Lord with the extra 1 attack trigger. So choosing to not play around Cleave, but hoping to save a point of equity in that direction.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we see the Scavenger come down here, but that Shatter Skull smashing here, if we see a land come off the top, could just clear that right out of the way.
Yep.
Actually, Shatter Skull smashing plus shot could 2-for-1 the Nighthawk out, and then that's lethal, right?
Yep, but we're 1 red short. We got a plains and a swamp there.
That's a tournament grounds up there, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So that.
Oh, we're actually 2 red short. Actually, we don't have Shatter Skull up at all. I'm a big ooh.
Oh, that's game. Jog it.
Yep. And we see Tom there reach for his concede button. We see a pretty I don't want to say deciding victory for the Knights player, but I think your observation that third game where the play versus the draw seemed very important there was definitely accurate.
Yeah, I think so. I think these Dimir decks against these aggro decks, but to be fair, we haven't been seeing a lot of aggro so far in the ladder play, but I feel like you really got to transition and put a ton of removal in so that you can just answer things on a one-for-one basis and then drop the Nighthawk Scavenger. That seems like a good way to beat aggro to me, but I just don't even know how many great removal spells. I guess you just overload on eliminates, maybe even extinction events would be an option
Yep.
to try to transition like that.
And that's one of those things too, where like the events that are happening this weekend and next weekend, what exactly goes in your sideboard is really tough on these week 1 tournaments, right? Like we've been playing with these cards for less than 3 days on the arena ladder, and these players are just as uncertain as we are in exactly what's going to be good. Like we can look at all the deck lists in this tournament, but we don't know which of them are going to be doing well 5 hours from now.
Yeah, no, 100%. And this is one of the toughest deck building sets that I've ever been a part of, and just trying to build decks for Versus Live or just build decks for now. I've really struggled with trying to find the mostly mana, trying to find the right mana bases, the right flip cards. It's challenging.
You're a very experienced deck builder like myself, and the heuristics that we've developed over the years have largely been thrown out the window because of these spell land flip cards, like things that have always come naturally. When rotation happens, all of a sudden I have to rethink all of my basic instincts because they just don't work anymore in the new environment.
Yeah, exactly. Land counts have to be way higher. Just everything is different. It's not your normal, 23 lands, 24 lands, 60 cards. It is really, really changed in the last 2 years.
All right.